Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have on a very special guest. We have on Mazrouei. And Hamed, you are a serial entrepreneur. You've got logos in the background for Milagro and Vivant. And I want you to explain a little bit more about what those organizations are, if you could. But I think we determined up to 5 different companies in your entrepreneurial journey, which actually started when you got fired. Why don't you, if you don't mind, just explain a little bit more about your background before we get started? And then we're going to talk today about how to build highly available fault-tolerant network infrastructure. But let's hear a little bit more about your background first, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, yeah. I start with the fun part. I did get fired out of Best Buy. Pretty interesting story there. The hiring manager, I couldn't get hired there actually to begin with. This was back in 2002, 2003. They were doing phone interviews and I kept failing the phone interview for whatever reason. And finally, one individual that was a department head got me hired. And I said, hey, that's the best decision you made. And you'll get promoted because of hiring me. Funny story, he did get promoted and he ended up firing me from Best Buy. But that was the end of my work as an employee, and then started a series of companies by the first one, all of them by need. So we needed video surveillance system initially at some of our businesses that was able to remotely be viewed. Back in 2003, 2004, those things didn't really exist. So I started working on that. Then everybody else asked for it and it started growing. And then the other companies also started the same way through the need to solve a problem, and then it ended up solving our own internal problem or a customer of ours, and then we started scaling up. And actually, even to date, that's exactly what happens. When we build new products, we either build it because we have a need or because our customer has a need. And then once that product is built, it's fine-tuned, we start scaling it for everyone else.
That's fantastic. And I know you have a big perspective too. You do a lot of technical work. You work with partners in a big way and believe in that partner ecosystem. But I want to get back to solving a need. And we're talking about highly available fault-tolerant network infrastructure. And it's amazing because even today, I think the stat that I recently read is that 56% of businesses still experience an outage on average once a month. It seems crazy to accept that with how much runs through our networks, how much we're reliant on our networks and serving our customers and the experience as well. So I'd love to just start out and just ask you about the importance of redundancy and how you, not only your own businesses, but for your clients, view it.
Sure. At the heart of every business today is the connectivity to the network, not just internet anymore. Yes, internet redundancy, but also network redundancy. Everything runs through the networks, everything runs through internet. So the moment you experience an outage, it's catastrophic for most businesses. We service healthcare, dealerships, restaurants, attorneys, etc. And for these guys, internet being down, network being down is literally, they're going to lose revenue that they couldn't recover otherwise. So it is extremely critical to have redundancies and not just, you can't just go in. This is what we started with. We provided a failover connectivity to our customers in order to keep the internet up and running. And just about a year and a half ago, we had a customer that came on and said, hey, we want a next level redundancy to not only provide redundancy on the internet side, but also on the network layer side.
On the network layer side, you already outlined this a little bit, but it's not just connectivity, but all of our business critical applications, our cloud applications, everything runs on our network or in the cloud these days. So what was the driving force when they made that distinction? And that last year, that wasn't that long ago. Why were they making that distinction? What was the challenge? What was the need that they had?
So actually, let me backtrack a little bit. We put this solution up about 6 years ago for one of our largest customers. But a year and a half ago, we were tasked with making it very cost efficient to run it within a restaurant industry. So we came up with this HAFT platform back in 2019. In fact, originally we started with our own project. We are a voice over IP company. Vivant is a voice over IP company. That's how it started. And then we needed to build a phone system that eliminated outages for our customers. So ultimately, after many iterations, we came up to this HAFT platform. We called it highly available fault-tolerant. We needed to make sure that it was highly available, meaning if one infrastructure, one node goes down, the customers aren't impacted. And we also needed to ensure that if a hardware failed, it would recover and there would be some automated way that it would recover, hence the word HAFT. So then we took that design, we started building on VoIP system, etc. And then we had one big customer that came on board that they were having issues with that. And they were looking for redundant internet connection. And our question was, okay, great, you've got redundancy there. What if the firewall fails? What if the switch? What if the APs fail? What if this happens? How do you ensure continuous operation, even with a hardware being down? And then we started saying, okay, now let's build a HAFT network infrastructure. And that's where the SD-WAN came into play. And we doubled the equipment. We put everything in a high availability mode and created a full redundancy from start to finish. And then over the course of next few years, 2-3 years, things did happen. There were outages on internet connections, which didn't impact the customer. There were surge that hit and some hardwares, multiple hardware devices failed within the building, but the site was still operational. And there were people that ran into poles and damaged equipment outside that again didn't impact the site, etc. So a year and a half ago, the task was, all right, that solution's fairly expensive. It's built for bigger businesses that have the budget. How do we scale that down and bring it to a few $100s a month in a restaurant operation where when you lose internet, you lose network connectivity, your online orders are down, your payment processing is down, third-party orders are down, everything that you need to have the business be operational is completely offline. And you just can't operate that way. So again, the whole ecosystem was built around eliminating outages through that HAFT ideology.
So in order to accomplish a scaled down version that maintains all the benefits of the larger, more expensive version, what did you have to do? What was the thinking to get from A to B?
So that process started with, okay, we know what an automated system looks like, and we know what that cost looks like. Let's try to replicate that. But instead of it being fully automated, maybe we'll have a couple manual interventions. And that's where the whole thing came into play. It's, all right, let's double down on our connectivity. Instead of having 2 broadband connections and a LTE backup, maybe we'll just do a primary and a failover. And on that front, maybe we'll, instead of having 2 active firewalls at the same time, maybe we'll have an active and passive. And then we double down on the network layer side to ensure that we build those redundancies so that if one hardware fails, the other one is still operational. And I'm a big fan of active. I don't think you should put a device in the network where it's active passive. Rarely does that make sense. And I'm a big opponent of make everything active because you're paying for it anyway. So you might as well utilize it 100% and not wait for a failure to switch over to a backup plan. So that was how the network was designed, architected in order to reduce cost. So it doesn't cost several thousand, it costs several $100s to deploy and operate it.
So there's the environments where failure happens that you've been talking about here. There's also degradation issues where there's throughput issues, and you want to have a reliable kind of multi-ISP environment. How did you tackle that?
So that was in partnership with Big Leaf, of course. These SD-WAN devices and the Big Leaf technology specifically, it's just unmatched. We haven't seen anything that operates like it. In fact, in the last 4 to 6 weeks prior to this podcast, we had that same customer that had a ton of problems on the headquarters side. Massive pipe coming in, 500 megs of bandwidth, all the QSs, all that stuff was configured on the firewalls, etc. However, you had these users that were just consuming a ton of data in spikes, 5-10 minute increments where they just literally took the entire network. And then we're like, okay, we don't know what's going on. We don't know why these things are happening. And then the moment we installed the SD-WAN device, everything normalized and problems pretty much all went away. We started running network traffic through the network. We congested the network, and it was very clear. You could run that test without the SD-WAN in place, and you could see the degradation of the video quality and all the tests we were doing. And then you put the SD-WAN in place, repeat the test, and the entire network was completely fine. And it was automatically deprioritizing all the congested traffic within the network that we were forcing in to try to take the network down. So that's how well it worked for us. And we were very pleased with the whole operation and the setup.
If you wouldn't mind, for the audience, explain a little bit from the Big Leaf side what they're doing in order to enable that kind of an environment.
So the interesting part about the Big Leaf SD-WAN is we're using an active and an inactive connection. So we have two internet connections that goes into the facility, and the advantage comes in with this dynamic routing. That's one. And then the other advantage is the monitoring of the circuit, the health of that circuit. So as Big Leaf is constantly monitoring that connectivity from point A to point B, and it would dynamically change the connection over to the secondary connection should they detect a problem. So that's number one. The second thing is the dynamic QSing within the network. So if somebody's consuming a ton of traffic and you've got high priority video, audio call, real-time traffic, it deprioritizes everybody else. And it gives a priority lane to the person that's using real-time traffic. Because you've got a CEO or COO doing a presentation on a Zoom call with a couple of hundred people, and you don't want that to be deprioritized because you've got a graphic designer sitting there that's downloading a 10, 15 gigabyte file that's going to take the network down for 3-4 minutes in the middle of the most important call of the month.
So there's a number of different ISPs that are coming in. There's dynamic reconfiguration, and it's automatically doing this. So we're changing ISPs, we're changing configuration. What is the effect to the user when those changes switch over? What happens on the user end?
So I'll give you a real example. Back to this client, the call that happened a week ago, the CTO responded to us saying, hey, the call was a success. Go back 4 or 5 weeks prior to that on the previous call, it was just mayhem. It's, hey, the videos are freezing, everything's fuzzy, nobody can see what he's presenting. And imagine if you're trying to give a presentation or if you're trying to play a file that you're sharing on Teams or whatever platform you use, and the other party can't even read or can't even make out what you're presenting. So the business impact is very real, and it causes a ton of frustration on both ends because the CTO or the CEOs are going to the CTO and saying, hey, that's your problem. You got to handle that. All I'm asking for is I need a reliable connection so when I'm presenting, I don't have these problems. And then the CTO is obviously going to ping us or the MSP on record and say, hey, that's your problem. You promise you're going to deliver.
So not only is there no downtime, no interruptions, but the network just magically started to perform much better. Like it was literally that kind of a night and day difference with their SD-WAN implementation.
Yeah, it's a Z on and off switch. And again, to us, the most impressive part was we could remove it, replicate the problem, put it in place, couldn't replicate the problem. And we were running accurate testing before and after. And it was very obvious that the difference between having it and not having it. And by the way, it's no longer about just simply having redundant internet connections. We've been doing that since 2019. And everybody has gotten into that game. And when we started, very few people were doing that. None of the big guys were doing that. Now everybody's doing some sort of a redundant connection, but you've got a device that comes in and that device fails. That's your primary connection and that's your failover connection. Now everything that you've done is useless because your primary device is now down, which means nothing after that matters. So if you're going to build and architect a network, it needs to be done properly. If you're going to pay for insurance, it needs to cover when things go wrong. So you have to design that network all the way through nowadays. And that's what we're working on now. We're no longer going to the customer saying, hey, here's a backup internet or failover internet connection, etc. Here's a full scope. This is what we recommend you go with. Now you have a choice to make. You either go with it or you don't go with it, but at least we're presenting the option so they can make the best decision for their business.
It was interesting. You said we plugged it in and we tested it. We unplugged it and we tested it. Usually when you're reconfiguring a network, there's a lot of customization that needs to happen. But you talked about as literally a plug and play type of environment. Is that correct?
That is correct. Look, I read something that said 90% of users never actually configure anything. They just use default settings. And that was something, I believe it was around the iPhone, where 90% of users aren't even customizing their ringtone. Just imagine. And by the way, I'm in that bucket. I don't really customize any settings on my iPhone that I can think about. I'm trying to think, what have I customized on my phone? Yeah, but that's the point. So to get a device that you have to spend 3 hours configuring is just no longer acceptable. I do that even in our organization. We preset and pre-configure as much as possible to ensure that when the device is plugged in, we're assuming no one's going to configure anything beyond that. And I think that's the key to success. That's the key to this big leaf configuration. It's plug and play. Everything's already done. All you have to do is just install it, plug it in, and it automatically does what it needs to do. The default configuration is robust and it's built to handle majority of the cases. In some cases, you may have to go in and do some customizations, but at that stage, the majority of the rest, just plug, play, move on, go do another project, move on to bigger, better things.
So I know you have your reputation on the line, your business, and these are your clients that you're servicing. How dependent is the Big Leaf organization on backing you up? So the promises that you're making to your clients, like their service organization to you, how does that work?
So I'll share a funny story. I'm a big car guy. So I've got some super sport cars, just enjoy them. And I originally had a BMW 535, really nice car. But when I would go over 105-10 miles an hour on the highway, it would start making this like high-pitched sound in the cabin. And I took it to BMW multiple times. They said, look, we've test driven the car. Everything's fine. There's nothing wrong with the car. Great, like 2, 3, 4 times. Finally, I got fed up. Reached out to BMW corporate. And I said, look, this is a problem I have. The dealership can't seem to fix it. Their response was, the speed limit is 70. You shouldn't be going over 70 an hour. And my response was, well, why did you make a car that says 160 on the odometer? So if you're going to promise, you better deliver. You're right. It's my reputation online. The customer doesn't know who my partners are, but if they don't deliver, then I can't deliver. I'm going to look like a fool. I'm going to lose the client, i.e. the partner's going to lose the client. So that partnership is absolutely critical. And we don't refer to our providers, suppliers as vendors. They're partners. Because if they fail to deliver, then we fail to deliver. We're only as good as our weakest link. So if that partnership is not a two-way street, if their team is not good enough, if they don't know what they're talking about, if we have to call a support team and we know more about the device than they do, that's a problem. So that partnership is absolutely critical. And so far with Big Leaf, it has been nothing short of our expectations. Everything's been, the team is knowledgeable, the product works. And this, again, we've been using it for about 6-7 years now. But this last case in point, the example that we deployed a few weeks ago, that we could put it in, take it out, and then see the difference in real time was just absolutely mind-blowing.
It's interesting because like this, your point on the by default, we don't really configure things much. The standard IT department, they don't want to take on more work. They don't want to, with every new solution that they bring in, they don't want to take on a lot of manual effort and customization. They want plug and play. They want their life to be easier so they can be more proactive instead of reactive to the network. And so I think I was just going to underscore how important that was. There was a story that you told me about the tenants that is in one of the buildings that your client houses in. And you talked about the importance of static IP addresses and failover. And I just wanted you to tell that story over again, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, sometimes people just by default say, oh, that's not possible. Why not? And that's what we ask. So the situation was very unique. We have these 10 office buildings that are in our city, and they're fairly large. They're about 40,000 square feet. They house about 170 tenants per building, similar to WeWork, etc. They're shared office spaces. And then you can also rent an office space. So when we were building this redundancy for the network, some tenants needed a static IP address. We could back up all the dynamic IP addresses. We built the redundancy on the ISP side. We built the redundancy on the firewalls, hardware side, etc. What we couldn't figure out is how do we build redundancy to keep those customers that have static IP up and running? Because the static IPs are generally assigned by the ISP. So if ISP 1 goes down, they take the IPs with them. So initially, we just kept trying to search for a solution. We couldn't find a solution. And we told them, hey, listen, like these tenants, a handful of tenants, 10, 15, 20 tenants in every building, if that ISP goes down, then they're going to be down. And then through partnership with Big Leaf, we were able to actually mitigate that and even keep them up and running by moving its statics from the ISP layer to the Big Leaf layer. So we moved it one level down. And by doing that, we were able to even keep those guys up and running, regardless of what happened with the ISPs. So that was a very impressive success stories of just not going with the status quo and saying, hey, it's not possible, trying to figure out a solution. And by the way, we get pushed in those situations all the time. And case in point, the static IP address, case in point, the solution that one of our customers was like, hey, that's what I want. I just don't want to pay several $1,000s. It's your job. Go figure it out. Come back with a solution. I know it's possible. You guys just got to go figure it out. So again, you got to bring in the right partners in order to help you design these solutions and challenge the people that say, hey, it's not possible. It takes time. It takes energy. But once you build it, then now you've set up a new frontier for everybody else to follow.
If you wouldn't mind, if I were to ask a question on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, the relationship or the partnership that you have with Big Leaf, and then the ability for you to provide the kind of services that you want to your clients. If you could rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of importance, 1, it's not important at all. We could change out them as a partner any day. 10, it's absolutely vital. It's critical to supplying the level of service that we want to provide to our clients. Where would you put them on that scale?
It has to be a 10. We don't tolerate anybody that's not at 10. We try to push as hard as we can. With bigger companies, it becomes a little bit challenging. We can't always go to a 10. But again, that's why we do a lot of things internally, because we believe and we feel like most other companies just can't support us the way we want to be supported. And that's a pretty straightforward thing. We're not asking them to do a lot. We're just asking, you provided this hardware. These are the specs. We're pushing the boundaries of the specs, and it's failing at 50% of your expectation. your expectation, not ours. So just fix it. And I think that's the criticality of having a successful partnership. The company, the person that promises and delivers on that promise.
We've covered so much territory, but I want to ask the question of, what haven't I asked? What's important to cover here that I haven't asked already as a question?
Overall, I think the idea is to make sure that the design is done properly, make sure the right partners are in play to build a network that, again, active versus active passive, and make sure that you cover for HAFT all the way through the network infrastructure, and make sure you have the right partners in place, and then just communicate that with the customer. Getting the customer involved so that they understand what you're doing, how you're doing that stuff is very helpful, and it builds that much more trust. And ultimately, I think if you can get all of that, then yeah, everybody wins. The customer wins, we win, our partners win, everybody's happy. And again, at the end of the day, the customer is not trying to create a mayhem for us, the MSP. They're just saying, hey, can you make sure this works so that we don't have these problems? And then obviously we're doing our thing, and then we rely on our partners that we bring in to deliver on those promises.
We've covered so much here, but for the audience, if there was one thing that you wanted them to take away, what would that one thing be?
Always ask why not. I think that's probably the best thing. Always ask why not. So if somebody says it's not possible, why not? I think Henry Ford also said something to the tune of, if I would have asked my customers, they would have asked for a faster horse rather than a car, and the innovation would have just stopped with a faster horse. So I think you should always ask why not. And even sometimes I fall into that trap where I'm like, yeah, it's too complicated. And generally that's the thing. And this latest customer that we added on, if it wasn't because of them, we wouldn't have built this redundant network. And he just kept pushing to a point that I was like, oh my gosh, he's not giving up. Like, he really means it. He wants it. And I have to figure out a way to deliver. And by him constantly saying, look, it's possible, go figure it out. And no, it's not possible. So we went back and forth for months until one day it just clicked. It's like, oh, that's what we could do. And then that's what we did. So yeah, why not? I think that's the most powerful two words that you could challenge everybody with, and just say, why not?
You know, your Henry Ford quote there, similar to that, Steve Jobs, he said, look, if we had asked people, do they still want the keys on their phone, or do they want to have just a screen? And he said, nobody would have we couldn't have found that in a focus group. We couldn't have found that by asking people. All they knew was the world of a phone, a smartphone that had keys on it. So sometimes you just have to imagine what's beyond the imaginable. That's a huge takeaway. Thank you very much. And one thing for sure, people are going to have questions after this. Is it appropriate that I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out?
Absolutely, yeah. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, I'm happy to help in any way possible. It's all about partnerships, and I'm a big networking guy, so I tend to make friends fairly easily with a lot of people that I meet and stay in touch, and together we can help solve a bigger problem. Again, sometimes some of these things comes out of having these conversations or collaborating with other people, and there's just so much opportunities out there that for the rest of my life, I won't be able to cover every single one. So I'm happy to share anything that I've done.
Fantastic. In that vein, the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives and insights over years of experience that we've all had in the industry and share with each other so that we can be that rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think you did that in a big way today. I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.